What is up, YouTubes? It's time for the Kamigawa Neon Dynasty Draft Guide. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people out there struggling with drafting this set, and I'll be honest, it's a tough set to navigate. There's a lot to wade through, a lot of complexities to think about whilst drafting, and a ton of combos to keep in mind, so I'm here to help you when jumping into some Neon Dynasty drafts. Friendly reminder that Card Kingdom and my patrons make this content possible, but you just liking and subscribing also helps a ton. Use my affiliate link below to help buy a box to draft with friends, or pick up the singles you want for the collection or commander decks you're building, and you can feel good knowing you are helping support this content. If you have no idea what Neon Dynasty is, check out my pre-release guide for a smoother intro to the set, but this is the draft guide. We're going at a quicker pace, we're taking an advanced approach to breaking down the set. Here's what I'm covering, now let's get into it. For mechanics, returning we have Ninjutsu. It's an activated ability while the card is in your hand, it swaps out for an unblocked creature, and then it does a thing, usually. Now, next is Channel. It's another activated ability. You pay the mana cost, discard the card from your hand, and then do a thing. Then we also have Sagas returning in every color. They're all fairly good, but instead of being sacrificed at the end of their last chapter, they exile and return as an enchantment creature. Also, if you open the Kami War, pack one, pick one, you are obligated to pick it, build around it, and then come yell at me in the comments when it doesn't work out. I'm sorry, but those are the rules. And then the two new mechanics, Reconfigure. We have artifact creatures that can double as equipment and attach themselves to other creatures. Some pretty good abilities here, just make sure you read the cards to know exactly what attaching them does. Then the last mechanic is Modified. It refers to any creature equipped, enchanted, or with a counter on it, like a 1/1 counter or menace counter. If they have any of those, they are modified. Moving on into our best commons. For white, Intercessor's Arrest is just great removal at 3 mana and the best white removal spell at common in the set. Spirited Companion works very well in multiple archetypes, as we will see. As an enchantment creature, it draws you a card on ETB. It has a pretty high floor because there are a lot of 1 toughness creatures running around in the set. All in all, really good card. For my third best common, it is Imperial Oath. If you do not agree, you should know that that is okay to be wrong. I'd still like to hear your counterpoints in the comments, but you have to play this thing first before dismissing it. The card is expensive, but it is being heavily slept on. The Scry 3 is always super relevant to continuing to draw the cards you need in the late game. This card is quite good. I have Sunblade Samurai as my honorable mention. A 4/4 with Vigilance in the set is not easily dealt with, but it also makes sure we can hit our land drops with the channel ability, and being an enchantment and samurai creature adds to its playability across multiple archetypes. For blue, its biggest strength in the set is tempo. So first, Moonsnare Specialist, bouncing a creature on ETB is great. The tempo swing from that can be huge, and if that's all it does, that means its floor is pretty high. It's a card you want in every blue deck, and it combos well with so much in the set. There's just a lot to like here. I'm often happy getting multiple copies in a majority of blue builds as well. Then I have Moon Circuit Hacker. It's also an essential 2-drop enchantment creature for so many decks. The ability to draw cards or filter through your deck is great. And with how aggro some builds can be, having solid 2-drops is a necessity. Then number 3, we have the Modern Age. Late game, it's a rough top deck, but outside of that bad scenario, it is good in all others. It helps you dig into your deck, it combos great with Containment Construct, and as a 2/3 flyer, it can be annoying to deal with or get through. Then my honorable mention is Network Disruptor. It's a 1/1 flyer that taps something down on ETB. It's very solid, amazing in the ninja deck. By being evasive and helping you activate ninjutsu, do not sleep on this card. Moving on to black, it has some of the best commons in the set, and my number 1 has grown on me and will be the focus of some builds. Okibo Reckoner Raid is number 1, because I would play 10 copies of this. It's just that troublesome to deal with. The flip side, having Menace is also a big deal. You can bounce the creature with Ninjutsu to repeat the draining effects. It giving Menace to vehicles is often less utilized, but the point is this card is good. Then we have Lethal Exploit at number 2. It's just solid removal at instant speed and gets better if you have modified creatures. And then number 3, Twisted Embrace. 4 mana, remove a creature or planeswalker and pump a creature, but it does put you at risk of being blown out, so you do have to be careful when playing it. And then honorable mention is Virus Beetle. This card is surprisingly good in the set. There's a lot of 2/1s or 1 toughness things again that this can trade up into when blocking, and each time you bounce it or recur it, which there's some synergies in the set as well, it just gets you ahead on cards. Being an early artifact play as well can be relevant in some decks. It's just a card I value highly for most black builds that you're going to run into. Red also has some amazingly strong commons, and unsurprisingly, a majority of them are removal. Number 1, we have Voltage Surge. It's a shock for a creature or planeswalker that can also increase its power up to 4 if you want to sack an artifact. It's just really, really good, and that's why I have it as the best red common. But Kami's Flare is right up there too. 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker that also shocks your opponent if you have a modified creature. It's a lot of value for 2 mana at instant speed. Number 3, we have Experimental Synthesizer, which is a card advantage machine. It has a lot of synergies and combos in the set. It's just an all-around solid card, and you should be playing it if you are in a red aggro or artifacts matter type deck. And then honorable mention is Ironhoof Boar, 5/4 trample haste, and the channel ability adds that flexibility we can always use in combat if needed. Now green has some of the best removal in the set, believe it or not, and is one of the deeper colors at all rarities. It has so many good cards. With Master's Rebuke, it can be blown out because, of course, it relies on you having a creature, but that's not something I'm often worried about. Jukai Preserver is a super flexible card, and one I'm never upset to have in my hand. It's an enchantment creature. It can modify creatures. It's a combat trick if we use the channel ability to modify 2 creatures. Just a ton of value to be had from it. And then I have Greater Tanuki being a 6/5 with trample in the set, makes it the biggest powered creature at common in the set. The trample ability is super helpful when you're dealing with a wide board, and the channel effect can be invaluable in some situations where you need help fixing your mana. Now, honorable mention is Geothermal Kami. If you are in a green-black deck or green-white deck especially, this is a must-play card because you start bouncing things, you get a ton of card advantage and life gain. You play this card, I promise you will be impressed by it. Now, artifacts to know as well, Ninja's Kunai, it should be seen as really a 3 mana, 3 damage to any target type spell, and that's what makes it really good, really flexible. Played in a deck that you're short on removal. It also combos really well with cards like Tameshi, although half the set combos well with Tameshi. Searchlight Companion is great, especially in the ninjutsu decks, having that evasive body you can bounce and then replay to keep widening your board. Some nice flexibility there. And there's some good combos and synergies to be had here as well, as we'll see. And then we'll throw out Brute Suit. It's really good in the aggro decks or go wide builds, but you don't really want to play this card outside of those, because if you cannot crew your vehicles in an efficient manner, then you're wasting resources and falling behind. The idea here is that if you're playing a lot of token creators or have a lot of 1 toughness, low curve type plays, Brute Suit can be that really problematic vehicle for your opponent. And then lastly, Ecologist Terrarium. One of the few mana fixing options in the set that can fetch you a different color land, and then you can dump a couple more mana into it to pump a creature. It's not great, but good enough for an honorable mention. The solo color power rankings are as follows. Green is the strongest, then red, blue, black, and white. Disagree? Great. Let me know why in the comments, and then if you agree, please argue with those people who do not agree in the comments for me. Thank you. But for real, I expect these rankings to change, but green I think is just heavily slept on, especially on Arena right now. This set's great to draft though, so don't read too much into this. Moving into the archetype review, I'm going to start with the aggro color pairs, and we'll start with red-white single file samurai, as I like to call it. We want to curve out and keep adding those attacking benefits while only attacking with 1 creature at a time. The samurai creatures are often the ones that have those beneficial abilities, while the warriors can just be there to help give us some flexibility about what we send into combat. I usually wind up in this archetype because I get early rares or uncommons that pull me in the direction, or I start with a good removal suite, and then these samurai creatures at uncommon or rare are what get past me in the mid to late draft. Ryu is the best creature in the set for this color pair because of how strong his extra combat ability is. Aganjo Uprising is our classic. Math is for blockers, and I'm just going to cast this because I'm sure it'll win me the game, because creating a lot of tokens with haste and menace is good. It's a complicated card to visualize, but again, just know, math is for blockers, and if you have them on the ropes, play this card, and it'll help you finish them off. For this deck, to be successful, you need a ton of 2 and 3 drop creatures and ways to get in for damage, whether that be equipment, or combat tricks, or removal. Regardless, you must be choosy with your non-creature spells, because the creatures are what will win you the game. So I'd be hesitant to play more than 6 or 7 non-creature spells in this deck. And the sagas are good, but they're not ideal in this build because they're going to slow you down a bit and not add to your board, nor do many of the creatures actually have warrior or samurais on the flip side. Moving on to Black-Red Artifact Sacrifice, it's a deck that can be extremely aggressive. Our ideal start to any game is turn 1, any artifact, turn 2, our gold card, or Sokens and Smelter, and then turn 3, the other one. And now, for 1 mana, we are able to sacrifice our turn 1 play, create a 3/1 with haste, add it to the board, and start immediately applying a ton of pressure. And then Anvil helps us keep that going, keeping us creating a token here and there, and pressuring our opponent. If our opponent cannot remove something here immediately, they are in for a world of hurt. Black-Red is an aggro build, but we can also flex into the mid-game, removing threats, pinging down our opponent if attacking in gets difficult. And there's sweet combos that we can look for, like Experimental Synthesizer with Heiko Yamazaki. Of course, this works in the Samurai deck, or really any red deck, but we find the most synergy here in the Black-Red Sacrifice deck. Point is, Black-Red loves the combos, that's what gets us ahead, and then it allows us to save our removal for those just huge creatures that we can't deal with and remove our opponent's bombs right away. Now, Blue-Black Ninjas relies on tempo, on evasion, and constantly keeping your opponent on uneven footing. Just know all the rares and mythic rare ninjas are great. Shocking, I know. But our must-haves are more along those 1, 2, and 3 drops at common and uncommon. These are what bring the consistency and synergy to the deck. Top tier importance in this area are those evasive creatures to make sure we can keep getting in for damage or ninjutsuing in our ninjas. If you have no way of getting through a 3 or 4 toughness creature, you're going to have a bad time. It's not the easiest archetype to pilot. Also keep in mind that you can fall behind on board if you overextend for ninjutsu because you are dumping mana into 2 creatures but only winding up with 1 in play. It's a lot of fun. It's a playstyle that often has answers for any threat your opponent plays, but you do have to be selective. You have to be patient about your interaction and then go for those aggressive plays at the right time. Now our last aggro color pair is red-green modified Big Bad Beats. This one is straightforward. We must have a low curve, as I'm sure you're noticing for a majority of these decks. You need those 2 and 3 drops. Again, they are essential in just about any draft you ever play in, but especially important in anything resembling aggro. You must be able to add to the board early and often with the ability to play cheap interaction, whether it be removal or combat tricks. Our bombs are more often of those mid and late game engine types, and that just ensures we can't be stopped. And a benefit to this build is being green and red means it's unlikely we get outscaled. Modified creatures I think are really good in the set. They are hard to deal with, and ideally we can make everything a threat so we are hard to stabilize against. Our biggest problem is either a slow start, and then we do have a hard time actually turning the corner, but it's aggro, low curve, keep applying pressure, be aggressive. Now for the mid-range archetypes, let's start with black-green recursion. With most mid-range decks, the point is to survive the early game and then grind for the win in the mid and late game. I want to reiterate the combo of Geothermal Kami and Gloom Shrieker. It's a quick way to just get insane value, and allows us to be more aggressive. With cards like Jakai Trainee, it's basically a 3/3 in combat when blocked or being blocked, and black brings more of the recursion, green brings more of the things worth recurring. Usually. The beauty of this deck is that if we lose our bombs, we can bring them back to win, or we can just keep trading away stuff in the early game to not get outraced, and then outscale our opponents. Not much else to say here other than black-green does a good job at splashing too, and rares like Tatsunari are amazing at taking over a game. Papercraft Decoy is the only other frog option in the deck, in case you were wondering. All in all, really like this build. If you get some of the premier uncommons and commons, you can rest assured your deck is going to be difficult to deal with. Okay, black-white is artifacts and enchantments. We get a benefit if we have both types under our control when we cast some things. Our other gold rares are okay, but this archetype is really about good stuff wins. It grinds out advantages through additional cards or tokens added to the battlefield, but we have to be careful about what we trade away in combat because we do not want to lose our ability to trigger those additional artifact and enchantment benefits. Some mid-range rely on being bigger, but this color pair relies more on being evasive. Flying and Menace is our friend here and is the most common way we get around our opponent's blockers. We gotta find a lane to get in for damage and then keep that lane open through removal or sagas. One of the biggest drawbacks to this archetype is it requires you to read all the cards to make sure you know what actually cares about artifacts and enchantments. So take your time when you're drafting and you find yourself in the black and white lane. And as long as you're selective with your removal, I think this one can compete with any other archetype. Now green-white, it really likes enchantments and enchantment creatures. It's one of my favorite archetypes in the set, and it utilizes sagas as well as any, with Satsuki being a powerhouse and showing off a little bit with them. As you can see, the rares are where you get a great deal of the synergy. And oh look, Geothermal Kami is here again, and Generous Visitor is the best turn 1 creature in the set. This archetype, its lifelink or life gain make it hard to race. Strong early picks in green are usually what start me down this path, and then getting the gold cards or other high-powered uncommons makes me confident in jumping into this color pair. But also remember how good Fade into Antiquity is. It's really nice because it can actually hit sagas before they flip into a creature. The exile effect can be quite relevant in some matchups, and I've never had a game where I have this in hand and did not have a good target for it. Blue-white, on the other hand, is probably the least consistent but highest powered archetype if you go the vehicles route. The focus then is on the vehicles and making sure we have the pilots for them. And if you get the gold card or multiple copies of the gold card, you are in a great position to have a deck whose top end is as good, if not better, than any other deck. The floor on this build, though, is what concerns me. The problem being is you are now reliant on good draws. If you lean into the vehicles too much, that means they're probably your top end or your heavy hitters, which means you need creatures to crew them. You also need other spells to have some chance of interacting with your opponent, and you need to draw the correct balance of land to play everything, or else you kind of fall flat. The more consistent way to build a deck is control. You have flyers to poke in, you keep answering their bombs and just keeping that air open. That's really where you can keep applying some serious pressure. The point is, don't be overly reliant on the vehicles, even though it is the focus of the archetype. Now, blue-red is Artifacts Matter. It's a bit more unique from what we've seen thus far in the mid-range color pairs. It also requires you to know what cards are good versus not good. Cards like Dragon Spark Reactor, it's a less consistent clunky removal spell. Scrap Welder, it's not great and limited and doesn't often bring much to the table besides being a 3/3 for 3. And a problem can be our good cards are utilized in multiple decks, but if we see our gold card or if we see stuff like Twin Shot Sniper, Replication Specialist, or Sky Swimmer Koi, we can feel confident that this lane is open. I also love getting early picks like Circuit Mender, Containment Construct, and Patchwork Automation to build up our base and then pick up more blue and red spells as we progress in the draft. And if you can see those signs that the artifact deck is open, I think you'll be really happy if you can wind up in this archetype. It's not one I often force though, because again, if you don't get those higher synergy plays, you're probably going to have a hard time keeping up with the stronger builds. Now our last color pair is blue-green channel, which is really more like play good cards and do powerful things. Just about every card with channel is good and limited, so that being the archetype focus is a bit too generic for me. I'm not drafting this deck to play channel cards. I wind up in blue-green because people keep passing good cards late, like Colossal Sky Turtle or the Sagas, like Boseiju Reaches Skyward. So this deck comes together because people are sleeping on green or blue in the draft. And this is probably one of the most flexible archetypes, or maybe I should say it's the one you can wind up in from multiple angles. The other difficulty here is if you're up against a blue-green deck, you should know that there's going to be some powerful Sagas coming in. I'm going to have to try and outrace this thing or have removal for their monster creatures because there's no way I'm going to outscale them or be able to go 1-for-1 with their creatures. When drafting, you may get pulled into this archetype because of all the late and mid-game plays getting passed to us. Just don't get greedy and take the 5th or 6th late game play when you only have 1 2-drop in your card pool. You must have enough 2-drops to not lose before you get going. Now the last color pair to discuss or archetype is Shrines. They are awesome. The green and white ones are the most playable outside of this archetype. Red and black play really well together too, and all 4 of these are likely not to go far in a draft. The dream for this draft is where you start off with a shrine or you get a few shrines in the first pack, and then maybe you were fortunate enough to get a late mirror box passed to you. Hopefully you get a shrine steward or 2, and then I usually wind up in a primarily black-green base deck to help us build up in the early game and then ramp into whatever we draw into the mid and late game. It is unlikely to work in every draft, but it can certainly work if you're ready for it and keeping an eye out for it and willing to commit to it. My buddy Michael went 7-1 in a sealed event with a shrine deck. So if you can pull it off in a sealed event, you can certainly do it in a draft, but you most likely, will have to commit early, use those top picks on cards that may not be optimal. Really, it's a high risk, high reward draft strategy, but if you can pull it off, I reckon you will remember that draft for a long time to come, and it'll be a cool story you can tell until your friends finally tell you to quit telling it because they've heard it too many times. But that's only because they're jealous. This takes me out of the archetype review and into the splashing conversation. Is it worth it in this set? Can it be done? Yes, the mana fixing is solid in draft. Having all 10 dual color tap lands is nice. Let me remind you, do not splash low curve creatures because you will most likely not play them on curve, and do not splash cards with 2 or more of that color pip in the casting cost. Just don't do it. Common splashing situations, Ishin is quite strong. Usually winds up in a primarily white-red samurai deck that we splash black for him or maybe a couple other bombs or removal we need. Hinata loves Jeskai Things, which focuses on artifacts, interaction, and grinding out card advantage. I usually wind up playing blue-white or blue-red, and then you splash the 3rd color for the interaction, for the evasive creatures, and for Hinata. Green-white can splash any color for Bomby Sagas or other strong enchantments. Blue-white-black or Esper can do a lot. It can go heavy into control, it can go wide, it can utilize a lot of flyers or have vehicles to be their bombs to get in for the win. It's a color pairing I like quite a bit, provided you get the right fixing for it. Now moving into the deck building and gameplay tips, 2 colors is preferred. Those splashing can be heavily rewarded. 2-drops are absolutely essential to any good deck in this format. I would just start with the mindset of I need at least 6 good 2-drops. And if you're playing a 1-drop, like our Snake Ninja Fang of Shigeki, sure, count that as that 2-drop filler. But without enough 2 and 3-drops, you're going to have a heck of a time not getting ran over. In general, I want good creatures over good removal, unless I have no removal whatsoever. This is not as bomby as Crimson Vow or as Feel Bad bomby. It does have deep synergies, and the creatures will take you further, more often than not, than having an excess of removal. With that said, there's a lot of removal in the set. Voltron strategies are not great because it will be shocking if an opponent cannot deal with multiple threats, let alone 1 or 2 throughout the game. This is a high tempo set, and combat is fast and furious. Blocking often feels bad with every color having 1-mana instant combat tricks, and there's a lot of interaction happening in games. Do not walk into blowouts, but also know what your opponent's game plan is, and if yours can recover from or wants to trade cards early, that can be the way you get ahead. If it's something like green-black, I'm willing to trade my creatures for theirs or my creatures for their combat tricks. If I'm in blue-white and I need my creatures to crew my next vehicle or to actually be able to do something in combat, or it's my only flyer that I have to actually poke in for damage, I'm never going to risk that in combat. I'm going to use my life as a resource. Take your time in the set as well. There is a ton of complexity to work through. There's a ton of combos you'll realize. The more you play, the more you'll understand the combos and you'll understand what pieces are really important to your opponent's deck. That's where you can focus that removal, or you can prioritize trying to get that card out during combat. But with that, I think Neon Dynasty is a tremendous limited environment. It's been a lot of fun to play. I think this set will make you a better player if you really dive into it and keep working through whatever struggles you run into. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Again, if you want to support the channel, like and subscribe. Use the Card Kingdom link in the description. I would much appreciate it. But that's going to do it for me, folks. I hope this helped. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Take it easy. Peace.